Hello, everyone. Good morning, and thank you for joining us on the fourth series of this COVID-19 webinar session. This morning, our subject of contemplation would be COVID-19 and the next big tax audit issues, with particular focus on avoiding the pitfalls. It is no longer news that the pandemic is here, and that it met us, particularly as a country, in the time where the prices of crude oil, have crashed completely, made it some sort of double tragedy for us as a nation. The lockdown measures also earlier imposed by the government, the federal government, have also made this have far overreaching effects. There are also indications that tax authorities active revenue drive of the government. There are indications that tax authorities would also resort into using more aggressive tax audit and investigation approaches to ensure that they achieve increased revenue. That can be evidenced from the recent pronouncement of the FRS saying that come 30th of June, field audits are going to continue, and they would the recent pause that has been experienced on DEX audit and internal reviews and resolutions of ongoing audits would also continue immediately. So while all of these are going on, what then becomes extremely important is the issues that have arisen as a reason of the pandemic. How best should taxpayers be positioning themselves to ensure that they deal with these issues when they become subject of a tax audit? For instance, the disposable income of consumers due to the pandemic, has fallen. Companies may then need to resort or rely on promotional tools such as trade discounts and rebates to drive sales and cash discounts to ensure early payment of their invoices. This is speaking with respect to cash and trade discounts. How will these issues be perceived, by the tax authorities when they are currently, they then become issues of contemplation during an audit? We would recall that earlier FRS had mentioned that there was a public notice issued instructing taxpayers to subject rebate and discounts to VAT and withholding tax, and they may then seek to penalize affected businesses for non-compliance during the audit. Bearing in mind that COVID-19 has brought about a peculiarity that has necessitated all companies to, in fact, need to survive. The practicality of enforcing the public notice then becomes a question of importance. Another major issue also that could come up at a time like this is impairment of receivables, non-current assets, and intangible assets. Chances have increased, chances of defaults, in repayments of loan obligations and what have you, have increased. And the accounting standards have always required that impairment be recognized where charges, or be recognized where the carrying amount of asset exceed the recoverable amount. Many companies have then had to recognize impairments, in line with this accounting standard on assets due to the adverse impact of the pandemic. Some customers may not be able to pay their receivables, and companies may then have to provide for some of these things. It may appear, if FRS, based on the position of the law, these impairments, and the position of the FRS vis-a-vis the circular that have been issued on the implementation of IFRS in Nigeria, these impairments are not supposed to be allowable. This position may then be unfair to taxpayers, as a non-deduction of impairment losses on trade receivable may imply an additional burden to such taxpayer with respect to paying taxes on uncollected revenue. Another major issue is the deductibility of COVID-19 donations, themselves. We've heard in the news instances where individuals and even corporates have had to donate big time, to the government and even to other agencies, just so that they will be able to alleviate the possible sufferings, or that the pandemic have inflicted on the citizenry. Unfortunately, Section 25 and Item 7, of the fifth, Item 7 and 11 of the fifth schedule to the CETA provides that the only donations to public fund and government-owned hospital and other statutory bodies are deductible. What then that implies is the fact that donations that have been made to some non-statutory bodies and private COVID-19 relief institutions may not be deductible for tax purposes. There have also not been any pronouncement from the minister as to the deductibility of some of these donations. So individuals have also donated, whereas the Personal Income Tax Act is silent about donations made by individuals. So these are major issues that would certainly come up, when the audit of this particular period that we are in, when they become reality in the faces of taxpayers, individuals, and companies alike. Another key issue is the fact that companies will have to substantiate salary reduction during this period. As a coping strategy, some of the companies have had to temporarily effect pay cuts for their employees. Where such reduction or such introduction of pay cut strategy, is not backed with formal contract of employment, it then remains a subject of contemplation by the time LIRS needs to review the books of the company, because what you have said you are going to pay at the beginning of the year and what you have indeed paid during the year, which is reduced, would have necessitated reduction, a corresponding reduction in the quantum of payee taxes that will be remitted. These are major issues. Another key issue really is the late returns penalty. Some companies have not been able to cope with meeting up with their obligations, as stipulated by the provisions of the law. Failure to meet up with these obligations and compliance requirements would certainly attract certain penalties as provided for by the extant provisions of the law. What are the things that are going to happen, given that the pandemic came upon all of us suddenly, and companies didn't in fact have opportunities, and individuals didn't have opportunities to prepare themselves well ahead of this issue. The other issue that would be interesting is the issue of documentation. Given that most companies are now working from home, most individuals are now working from home, from the comfort of their room, some of the procedures that have been previously established with respect to the processes, how they file their documents, how they archive documents and stuff, will have been disrupted. And this has been going on for a while, meaning there's possibility for a huge documentation issue or non-availability of critical documents, which can result in huge and avoidable exposure. Because as we well know, liabilities don't crystallize in some instances because taxpayers didn't pay the money or they didn't do the right thing. Liability could actually crystallize because you didn't have enough documents to substantiate such position. Another key issue, of course, is the issue of the implication of employee turnover, in finance and tax functions. Some companies have actually taken drastic measures, as we are aware, such as reduction in employee size in an attempt to survive the pandemic. Some of the key personnel in tax and finance functions have been affected, and the question is that when this happens, individuals that have been handling issues relating to audits, for such companies may have been affected, meaning the understanding and the knowledge that they've had on those historical issues may pose a challenge. So these are the basic issues that are likely going to be coming up when the audit of this kind of peculiar period comes up. And the question is, how are they going to be resolved? Are they going to be resolved with understanding, bearing in mind that the pandemic has brought huge hardship on people? Are the provisions of the law going to be strictly followed? The issue of deductibility, like we've said, of some of those donations, these are key issues. And this are the things that are forming our subject of contemplation this morning. So I'm not alone this morning, as it is our practice. I've been joined by a very great set of panelists. We have in the house one of us is an assistant director in the oil, gas, and power unit of Andersen Tax Nigeria, Chinwendu, Enechi, and is going to be contributing to this very important discourse this morning. I've also been joined by the special advisor to the executive chairman of the LIRS in the person of Mr. Abideen Akande. He's joining us live on this program today from Lagos. And of course, representing the LIRS there. When we are talking about taxpayers, tax authorities, we've raised the issues that concern the states. And it's also important that the issues that concern the federal, are equally addressed. And doing justice to that part of the discussion this morning would be Mr. Abubakar Ahmed. He is the Deputy Director and the Acting Head of Tax Audit Department with FRS. So I would say that you should fasten your seatbelt as we sail through, this morning. In the course of getting our participants to register for this program, we've given opportunity for them to provide questions that they would like the panelists to provide answers to, and that is where we are going to be kickstarting from even this morning. Although we still have the opportunity to take additional questions even from here while the discussion is going on, but I would just like to start from those questions that have been harvested from our participants as at the time they were filling registration for the program. So very quickly, I'm going to start with Mr. Ahmed of the FRS. A lot has been said in laying the background, and taxpayers have been wondering how will these things happen. So to start with, I would like you to help us address this issue. How is the FRS, given the lockdown measures and what have you, how is the FRS reconciling tax audit issues with taxpayers with respect to ongoing audits that have already been initiated prior to the lockdown, prior to the pandemic? And in addition to that, the FRS has also mentioned that field audit will commence by June 30th. However, there are still measures that have been announced and being announced daily with respect to how to cope with COVID-19, thereby necessitating social distancing measures as recommendation. How practicable will this pronouncement of the FRS then be? Mr. Ahmed, over to you, sir.
Okay, good morning, moderator, distinguished panelists. Thank you very much for having me. Let me kickstart this thing by saying that in the first instance, tax audit is a compliance tool. Secondly, you see, the issue of COVID-19, like all of us know, the virus is novel. It had impacted on virtually all sectors, all stratas of activities. FRS is no exception. If you have been following the executive chairman's pronouncement, you will have noticed that from March to date, several public notices had been issued out with a view to actually explain to the taxpayers that the service understands the situation under which we are. You have just announced the issue of kickstarting. I think what happened was that there was a public notice suspending field audits, investigations, and desk audits. There were public notices on the issues of palliatives about interest and penalties not being paid by taxpayers who took advantage of the pronouncements to pay outstanding liabilities. Now, even with the issue of the circular for recommencement, the executive chairman was very, very directly concerned about social distancing. In the process, staff have been advised to reduce the number that will, if they have to, go for a field audit. In the process of what we have been doing, we have communicated with our colleagues, giving them directives on trying to also use other means of interacting with taxpayers and tax consultants as much as possible. All the protocols of COVID-19 situations as announced by the federal government, and the ones also the service itself tries to make staff to understand are supposed to be followed. So we're actually concerned, and we're actually aware of the situations, and so that's the way we're going to be doing it. We are going to be doing our own activities by observing the protocols. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Ahmed. Thank you for letting taxpayers know that the FRS is concerned and all of those measures will be put together. Staying on you still, the issue of tax deductibility of the COVID-19 donations, has been raised, together with the fact that taxpayers may need to recognize provision for doubtful debt and the inability of their customers to be able to make payments, for those receivables that they have booked. What is the FRS position on this? What are their considerations that are going to be given? Are there taxpayers have expected that by this time, 3 months into a whole quarter into the pandemic, there should have been some sort of pronouncement, giving some sort of certainty as to what the treatment of those donations should be, based on, in addition to what the tax laws already stipulate. So are there anything in the works, that you would want taxpayers to know about the deductibility of the COVID-19 donations and the recognition of the provision for doubtful debt, which has become inevitable at such a time as this?
Thank you, Mr. Dejo. Like I said, tax audit is a compliance tool. And like I said earlier on also, the virus is novel. Issues are also novel. We have the tax policy and advisory department. We have the board, we have the management. All of us are Nigerians. All of us are staying in the world. We know what is happening. The service under the lockdown has also been working partially where we can afford to, and then also online where we can also afford to. So these issues, I'm sure, are being addressed, and these issues, like others, will also come up with pronouncements by the management and the service about what we are supposed to do. Taxpayers should just be assured that the service is concerned about their own concerns and feelings. And pronouncement, I believe, like public notice have been issued, will also be done as at and when due. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Ahmed. I would quickly go to Mr. Akande. Mr. Akande, in the light of what has been discussed and what is the impact of the pandemic that is rather palpable at this time, when is it likely that the LIRS would commence fresh tax audit exercise? And how does the LIRS intend to carry out this audit in the face of this new normal that we are currently experiencing?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Oladejo. I would like to first agree with my colleague, Mr. Ahmed from FRS, that we know that tax audit is not an end in itself. It's just a compliance tool. And essentially what we are trying to do is to ascertain the compliance level of the taxable entities. Now, at our end, our focus now is not really on the field exercises as we have it, but on the reconciliation of the open audits that we have. And the reconciliation procedures, we are likely to roll out a public notice before the end of this week, as we intend to start the reconciliation process by 1st of July this year. And we'll seize the opportunity that this, because what we, like I like to tell people, yes, we have a crisis in place, but it has given us the opportunity to actually fine-tune our procedures and processes. And what I see here is that it gives us a real opportunity to actually improve the efficiency of all the things that we are doing. Yes, we might lose some things out in the effectiveness of the process itself. So it's a trade-off, which I think LIRS is likely to buy into. Going forward, anyway, what we have decided, which I can share possibly with you, is that the default mode for reconciliation shall be by video conferencing. We appreciate that it's something that has become the norm now, and physical meeting will be an exception. So that's the basic first decision we've made. Now, this one calls for a lot of, you put pressure on the kind of documentation that we need, because like I always tell people, the challenge of taxation in Nigeria, yes, people don't want to pay tax and what have you, but basically it's on the availability and accessibility of credible third-party documentary evidence to validate the filings made by taxable entities, whether individuals or partnership, as the case will be for us at the state level and the corporate entities at federal. So essentially, we appreciate that we will have some challenges along the line, but I can tell you what we have said, that we'll put in structures that will be able to ensure that we have close to seamless transition from where we were before to where we want to be. And maybe I should stop there.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Akande. I was shaking my head all through while you were giving that response. Let me quickly go to you, Chinwendu. Mr. Akande, in his response, has stressed the need for documentation. In the phase of the new normal, that we are currently experiencing, how can taxpayers organize their tax audit documentation for potential virtual audits in the future? Because Mr. Akande has said reconciliation will kickstart, reconciliation processes will kickstart by 1st of July. It's possible that meetings are now going to be held online, except when it becomes extremely critical. So the basis for taxpayers to be able to demonstrate that they've done the right thing with valid documentation is absolutely essential at this time. So how should they, begin to organize their tax audit documentation on a going forward basis? Chinwendu.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dejo. I quite agree with what Mr. Akande just said. I mean, the COVID-19 pandemic has come with its challenges, but it also presents companies with opportunities to leverage technology. A lot of companies probably have been making plans to do that, to as much as possible leverage technology. But for some reason or the other, if you continue to put that forward, push it ahead. But with the COVID-19 pandemic, most companies will be forced to leverage technology. Now, and how you can do that is basically to have something like some companies do have, some firms do have it, like a SharePoint, where you can then scan your documents and have them saved, in a cloud, and you can then share that with the revenue authority, probably provide them with certain rights, maybe to view and not make any modification to it, or maybe to print. So this is a time for companies to actually make that investment with respect to technology. But like you said, the audit process and the reconciliation meetings will have to go on. So it's no longer business as usual, where you have companies carrying files and files of documents and going to the LIRS office or FIRS, as the case may be. So it's the time for companies to wake up and look for ways to then put those documents. Of course, it's going to require a lot of time to scan them. But again, there are companies who offer these services, like Andersen Tax now. You can, contact the service provider who can help you put those documents in a format that you can share with a third party, like I said, providing them with the relevant rights so that you also protect the integrity of the document that you have shared.
Thank you so much for that, Chinwendu. Very quickly, I will go back to Mr. Ahmed, and I'm going to stay on you for a couple of minutes, because the role of the FRS is quite pivotal towards revenue generation, for the entire country and fulfillment of the budget as it were. So quite briefly, Mr. Ahmed, what do you think taxpayers can do, with respect to ensuring the tax deductibility of impairments on trade receivables? If you look at this question, when we got this question from one of the participants, I could understand what people are probably going through. People have taken loans to build filling stations, and they had obligations that they will pay the bank, on a monthly basis, say 20 million naira, and then you sold stock to people, on credit with the hope that they will pay. They are your customers. They've always paid in time past, but this season has now presented a very great level of hardship and they can't pay. So you have to impair the receivables so that those receivables will become deductible in the light of the rude shock that we all are now living in. What do you think taxpayers can do?
Thank you, Mr. Deji. Like I said,
I think you are on mute. You're on mute at the moment. Okay, we can. You've gone back to. Okay, we can hear you now.
You can hear me now.
Yes, thank you, sir.
Yeah, okay. Like I said, specifically, tax audit is a compliance tool. You see, this concept of an expense item being wholly exclusive, necessarily unreasonably incurred in the course of business is very, very important. The purpose of tax audit itself clearly is not only meant to generate additional taxes, but is to ensure compliance with the provisions of the Act. The Acts are there. Now, the important thing is, like your colleague has said, is whether the taxpayer is able to present documents, third-party documents, to justify certain expenses. Once you have that, your case is simple. You see, we have just sort of improved the tax audit process, issued it to the public on the 19th of May. We are going to go back to the concept of risk-based audit. We do not have the facility, the manpower to go auditing everybody every time at the same time. We go out on audit if it's not routine, based on risks. There will be exit meetings, and the new process requires that the audit findings will be attached to the letter of invitation to the taxpayer for reconciliation. You have seen the findings. You have your documents. Come up with it. Like I said, the virus is novel. It has brought about a lot of challenges. But like you and so many others know, the service had actually started the process of automating its processes right before the COVID-19. So there are avenues for taxpayers to file their returns online. There are avenues for taxpayers to generate their receipts online. There are avenues for taxpayers to make inquiries online. Virtual meetings have happened between taxpayers and tax audit staff during the COVID-19. We have had it. I'm sure some of you are maybe viewers or followers of this particular thing might have experienced these things maybe at one or more time. So forget about this particular cost or expense item that you talk about. Whichever item is involved, once it can be established that this particular thing had been done. For example, now companies are buying sanitizers. Will ever come and say, no, you cannot claim sanitizers because of the health of your staff? Yeah, these are some of the things. So provided that these things are done for the purpose of generating the income that you pay the tax, and it can be clearly established with documents, it will be allowed. Thank you.
Thank you so much for answering that quite passionately. And you've actually touched on one of the questions that was sent in by one of the participants, with respect to the potentials, of having FRS switch to a risk-based approach of auditing, Thank you for touching on that. So where I would just want to go, immediately from here is the area where you mentioned that tax audits is not just to ensure, it's not just a revenue exercise. There's a question here alluding to the fact that over the period, tax audits conducted by FRS have taken the appearance of the fact that they are designed solely to collect additional revenue and as a witch hunting exercise. I don't know, is there some sort of training that, because this person must have said this based on his or her experience, with the FRS. Is there some sort of training that is uniform across board to the members of staff, that go out there to relate with people, such that the audit exercises themselves are not perceived as being witch hunting exercises? Or what do you think can be done to correct that impression? Because you've touched on it yourself, and this person is saying it appears over the years the audit exercises are more like revenue generation tool and then witch hunting exercises. What do you have to say to that, Mr. Ahmed?
Thank you so much. You might have noticed that even your colleague there is laughing when you talk about witch hunting. the thing is that, like I said, now we even have a process. The reason for issuing a process is to ensure standardization. And that particular process is in the open there, so that most of your colleagues as stakeholders also have it. But you see, some of these kind of observations or comments once in a while do occur. Once in a while, you have people maybe calling you to complain. But by the time you ask for details, the next thing is the Nigerian factor will come. You see, I don't want to be seen to be the person that caused somebody to lose his job and these kind of things. Sometimes the taxpayer will not even tell you what he has done from his own perspective. But you see, like I said, our audit going forward is risk-based. It's going to be risk-based. Like I said, we don't have the staff. We don't have the logistics. We don't have the facility to go all out. From the beginning, even the target given to us by management will clearly show you that the essence of tax audit is not only to collect additional taxes. If the records are there, everything is in order, we will just clap for you. Thank you very much. Where we notice that maybe you are not doing the right thing, we'll just look, going forward, do A, B, C, D, E, so that X, Y, Z will be clear by the time we come. Tax auditors do not create their own laws. They are there to ensure the compliance with the law. The law is there in the open. This issue, for example, was started bad. If any tax auditor from Evers will write a letter to a client by now, I'm sure, and say you want to go back to audit something in 2002, the next thing you will say, hey, no, man, you are going out as started bad. You are going outside the law. Please, some of these things, like the saying goes, it takes you to tango. Sometimes when you hear some of these kind of complaints from taxpayers, and the next thing that you try to find, you find that the person is not cooperating. Okay, they have written to you. There are avenues. We are here at the headquarters. We virtually our website is there. There are emails for inquiries. The chairman's numbers are there outside. People can call him and complain if there are issues they feel that they are being witch hunted. But those are coming to equity that they say must come with clean hands. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you so much, sir. I said that I'm deliberately staying on you, so I will move to, and it's amazing that I've not exhausted the questions we harvested. We're already getting additional questions for you, Mr. Ahmed. But very quickly, let me just throw this at you. That you've mentioned that emphasis will be placed on taxpayers' ability to be able to demonstrate with documentation. But while we were having the introduction the other time, I did mention that part of the challenges that taxpayers are going through now is their inability to be able to maintain their documentation procedures as they used to while they were in the office. Are there going to be any concessions with respect to the level of documentations required during a tax audit. You know that list is always very long. When FRS writes you and you get that list is very long, you know. We are saying that, I mean, taxpayers are saying that during this period, the pandemic might have posed some sort of challenges to them and not enabled them be able to keep their records in the way they have designed, you know, their companies to keep those records. Are there going to be concessions? Are there going to be obvious lookaways from the purview of the FRS during audits?
There are going to be considerations.
Perfect.
Yes, there are going to be novel considerations, believe me. If you observe what the executive has been doing during the COVID-19 about issuing palliatives, using some other sections of the law to try and pick away certain things. There have been extensions about the timing of filing VAT. There have been extensions about the timing of filing audited reports. There have been a kind of stopgap, stop-field audit now. Okay, even when you are going to continue, do it at a situation whereby we know about those particulars. Believe me, we are all Nigerians. We are all in the same world. We are facing the same thing. I gave you example of the issue of sanitizer. Maybe if you have to look at an FRS staff maybe that retired in the last maybe 27, no, we are allowing a professor of sanitizer. We're like, what is that? But this is something that is happening now. Considerations. Remember that they introduced the issue of Finance Act.
Okay, I think the network is not being fair to us from the side of Mr. Ahmed. We trust that the network will be corrected and we can ask him. Okay, I think he's back online. We lost you at some point. Yes, but you are on mute now. You could just wrap up that question so that I take the next one. Hello, sir. You are on mute at the moment. You could just unmute yourself, unmute your mic. Yes. Yes. I think it's okay now.
You can hear me now?
Yes, perfectly.
Okay, the challenges with the system, something, the internet.
Yes.
We are aware of that. Well, like. Public notices beyond.
Okay. I think we managed to catch that. We managed to catch that, to say that concessions should be given. And I mean, here is Solomon asking you if there's going to be extension for submission of 2019 financial statement with respect to the account. Yes, Mr. Ahmed has mentioned that. And there was also a public notice, you know, mentioning that extension has been pushed to one month. So I think that's a good one. So Mr. Ahmed, still on you. Before I then go to our other panelists, you know, for obvious reasons, I've said that the FRS maintains a very strong point in making this happen. There's a question here saying that tax, and you've mentioned it somehow on statute VAT, says tax. Hello?
Okay, I can hear you.
Okay.
So my time is almost there.
Yes, I think this is going to be it for you. That the tax sometimes FRS conducts tax investigation on companies that have already been audited for tax purposes, you know, and then go beyond the periods that would make such exercises be statute barred. Is it always the case that any investigation exercise is due to fraud, default, and willful default, you know, or are there investigations just on a routine basis? So this question is saying, does FRS come up with investigation because it is interested as a body to go back to those years that have been audited, and because those years are now statute barred, then they have to bring the big stick of investigation? Or is it always a case of there is an establishment of fraud or default or any neglect on the part of the taxpayers?
Like I said earlier, we don't have the facility, the logistics to go through. Investigation is never a routine issue. It's not. Right now, with the new structure, investigation is actually a different department under the enforcement support group, whereas tax audit and special tax audit are under the compliance support group. So even by virtue of that particular demarcation, you understand that investigation does not just happen. Investigation is never routine. It had never been. It can never be. Because the service cannot afford to keep a bunch of staff for 6 months on a particular case, just one case. In the end, you may end up not getting anything if care is not taken. So investigation is not routine. It's not. It's not a routine thing. It's not. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Abubakar Ahmed. We appreciate the justice that you've been able to do to the questions. We are still getting additional questions from our people, but if the time affords us, we'll come back to you, but very quickly, let me go to Mr. Akande. I saw him shaking his head in acknowledgement of everything Mr. Ahmed has been saying, because the two tax authorities are brothers and sisters, actually. So now I'm coming to you based on the questions that relate to LIRS. You have mentioned that LIRS had leveraged on, have done things that have made the life of taxpayers, easier with respect to payment of taxes and what have you in time past. We're also aware that LIRS has pioneered several technological initiatives, such as online filing and the likes. Is the LIRS ever planning to leverage technology to conduct audits in the future? You've mentioned the issue of reconciliation, but we are saying the conduct of an audit, where we will start opening meeting, one side of the divide will be company, one side of the divide will be the LIRS and the TAMA, and then we are not in the same building and we are conducting the audit. Will that ever happen?
Thank you again, Oladejo. Like I said, what we have done is that we take things in sequential order. So what we have done is to first focus on things that are open. Then we have created a small unit to actually look into the process. And if I can just go through the process chain that I have here, is that we realize that you have to first notify, that's notification. You agree on the date of the field work. Then you have the actual field exercise. You have your exit meeting. Then, of course, you generate report, goes to the issue of the usual demand notice. There will be objection, and then there will be reconciliation, the appeal process as well. And then you have payment and closure of the audit. Now, it means we have to go through all these steps to see those ones that we can actually find a way to suit the current protocols that we have to live with. And it's a process that we have just started. We have not finalized it, but I can assure you that we will come out with something that is very robust, that will be easy and less expensive, because that's, like I told you, less expensive for the taxpayer and then also for tax administration. Like I said, we know that this is an opportunity for us to actually improve our processes. Yeah, it will not be as effective as maybe the physical audit that we're going to have, but eventually we are going to have an abridged version of something that we can all work with. We have not, the question is, do we have something in place? No, we don't have. Are we planning to have something in place? The answer to that is yes. And then have we started the process of actually trying to see the modalities of things that we need to put in place? The answer to that one is also yes. So that much I can assure you, we have something that can be situated within the confines of the administrative advisories from both government and the health authorities, but also serve the purpose of allowing us to ascertain the compliance level of the taxpayer. And like Malam Ahmed has said, it's not always all the time that it's about maybe the taxpayer paying back money. Sometimes, and I can tell you, we have very few instances, which we have in Lagos here, of people that even after tax audit, we realized that they had actually overpaid. Unfortunately, we don't have a program in place for refund, but it's something that hopefully down the line we can think. So we can now, what we have done in their own case is that we allow them a kind of credit, which they now use against subsequent tax obligations. So a tax audit essentially is just to ascertain whether you are fully complied. If you have not, so there's X that you need to pay back, yes, and then we advise you on, so we show you the areas where you have been deficient, and then so that going forward you don't go, or we ascertain that well, we are actually fully compliant, or sometimes because occasionally some issues arise and through clerical error or statistical error, you actually have over, and then we will recognize that as well. So if we all have that mindset, and the key thing, like I've said, is let us have credible data to support whatever filings the taxpayer has sent in to us. That is the key. Once we have that, then we are on the same page. We can all see it. And tax is based on numbers. And numbers, they say, don't lie. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you for saying that, Mr. Akande. Numbers indeed do not lie. Staying on you, I would like you to, I mean, we've heard the FRS's response to the issue of donation, even where the tax laws, with respect to the SITA, have made clarification on what should happen to donation. In the case of individuals, we've seen and we've heard of individuals that have donated $1 billion, in their personal name, and the personal income tax is silent on donations, deductions of donations. How do you think, would these donations be allowed? How do you think they are going to be treated, for tax purposes? Are there anything in the works, from the perspective of the LIRS?
Yeah, okay. Now, LIRS is an agency of government. Tax is a fiscal tool, and the fiscal authority is finance ministry as well representing it. So essentially, we know that there's no provision for it under PITA, and that's a known fact. So the issue of being silent is not the issue here. The issue is that there is no provision for it under PITA. Now, we have social responsibility to the environment in which we live. That does not in any way absolve us of our legal obligations to pay taxes. To get it now. Now, is LIRS going to make representation to the Lagos state government? Because don't forget, we are just collecting money for this government, does not belong to LIRS. So is the incident general himself, commander, that's the Mr. Governor, willing to do that? I cannot speak for him. You understand? I'm not in a position to speak for him because Now, that decision will essentially come from MOF, that's Ministry of Finance, and Mr. Governor himself. However, have we done something and which we have passed to Ministry of Finance to the Governor? Yes, we have done something which we have passed to them, but those are not things that I can share with you because it has not been approved or anything like that. But I can tell you, aside from that, there are other palliatives also measures that we think the government can put in place. But essentially, it will come from, we can only give administrative palliatives to get it as relates to tax administration. Anything that involves financial palliatives, then it would not necessarily come from LIRS. It will come from the government of Lagos State. And I can assure you, Lagos State government is quite responsive. And we have seen what Mr. Governor has done in the last 2 or 3 months. If anything at all, it has shown the world the caliber of person we have governing Lagos. And I think we are all better off for it. And I can tell you, it also reflected even in the attitude of the taxpayers, because we surprisingly, even during the lockdown, this is something I can share with you. The volume of collection that we got was unbelievable because people were able to see what the government was doing with their money. And that's something that we are proud of in Lagos. So as regards donations, I think we can take care of that. Then the issue, there was another issue that my colleague was, the issue of staff layoffs and salary reductions and what have you. Those are going to be documentation driven. Once we have our proper documentation, there won't be any issue on those ones. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Akande. And that would make me come to you, Chinwendu. You heard what Mr. Akande said, that there are things in the works, but of course they can't be, it would be premature to start discussing those things at this forum. In the light of this, what other treatments or other options do you then think taxpayers have, to be able to cater for these donations, and ensure their deductibility in some sort? What other treatments or opportunities do they have, or options? You are currently muted, Chinwendu.
Okay. Thanks. Obviously, like he said, the Peter currently is silent on donations. But if I lean on what Mr. Ahmed also said, even though the CIT Act provides for how you treat donations, it's not so clear how you treat donations under COVID-19. But I think the important thing is, first of all, to have documents to show what you did with the money and who did you donate with. So if I look at Peter, for instance, there's no provision that speaks to how you treat donations or that kind of donation. So it's very important that taxpayers then have documents to actually demonstrate what they've done, or to prove what they did with the donation, or who they donated money to. Obviously, this is a time that the tax authority will also bear in mind that it's a different time from what we used to have. So a lot of concession will have to be given to taxpayers. So you have taxpayers who are going to be doing different things, things different from what they used to do in the past. But what is important is for you to be able to support the treatment you've given to whatever item in your tax return. Obviously, documents will be very, very relevant. Even if the law in Peter, for instance, doesn't provide for how you treat that, I think it then leads to that situation where the Lagos State Inland Revenue, for instance, will then have to sit down with the taxpayer to say, look, I understand what has happened, and if you've provided a document to show that you did in fact make that donation. And if you remember that the taxpayer obviously made that donation for a good cause, so it is only right that the state authorities, have that at the back of their mind, that look, such donation obviously should have some form of incentive, tax incentive, for the benefit of the taxpayer. So they can always reach some form of agreement. It's going to be like a settlement discussion, really, because you're having to accord a treatment that the law doesn't provide for. So the state inland revenue will then have to, exercise some form of discretion. Now, the question then is whether they are able to exercise such discretion. It's something that the state authorities will then have to sit back to see, okay, how do we then address these issues when they arise? It's reassuring to hear that there's something in the works. Maybe at some point, the state authorities will then advise taxpayers on how to treat those kind of items.
Thanks so much for that, Chinwendu. Staying on the issue of discretion.
Yeah. Can I quickly come in there?
Please go ahead, sir.
Yeah. Let me clarify this, so that it will be easier we need to learn to operate within the ambits of the law. Do you understand? And the beauty of it is that whilst Peter does not recognize donations, there's a provision under Peter that allows the executive governor of any state to actually waive some portion of taxes due to be paid by an individual. So that's a clause or a provision that can be exploited without necessarily maybe going against the law. Yes, we can then go ahead to have a way of maybe formalizing it through maybe the next proposed Finance Act for 2020 to see how we can sort of maybe domesticate and put it in the law. And then so that going forward, we won't have to have kind of a breached arrangement. So that's what I think we should do, so that we don't create a room for just an haphazard way of doing things. We know it is not recognized by law, so there's no point pushing it. However, there's a provision that allows, because if all the donations go straight to the government anyway, so we have a complete record of all things that have been donated and what have you. So a decision can be taken at that level, which we now implement at the agency level. So everything will still be within the ambits of the law. That's the way I know. That's my take on this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. There are additional questions coming in, and I'm picking from them, and as well as picking from the questions that we received from taxpayers at the point of registration. Let me direct this to you, Chinwendu. This is asking specifically with respect to deductibility of the provisions for bad and doubtful debt. You know, we've emphasized that in the course of this discourse, and this person is saying, should it be left to discretion of the tax authorities, particularly the FRS? Should it be left to discretion of the FRS? You know, I mean, if it's left to discretion, you might say the FRS would most likely exercise that discretion, maybe not to your favor as a taxpayer, you know. So what do you think, Chinwendu?
Yeah, thanks, Deja. So, I mean, like we have it in law, first of all, under CETA, we operate a self-assessment regime, meaning that for a taxpayer, you're basically going to look at your books and determine what your tax liability is. So the first line of treatment is actually, you know, by the taxpayer. Now, once you accord that treatment, the expectation is that you're able to support whatever treatment you're giving to an item with some form of document. Yes, for impairment provisions, you know, as it were, we are at a time where those kind of impairments are likely going to happen because obviously companies are looking to manage their working capital, so they're probably going to have to give some form of credit or some write-off, you know, or give some concession to some of your customers so that you're able to recover a good amount of money. So obviously you're going to have those kind of impairments. But the first thing is for you to then have a support document. I think Mr. Ahmed did allude to that. And it's also quite reassuring to hear him say that the FRS will most likely are going to look at that issue. Everybody is aware of what's happening. Obviously, that will be treated on a case-by-case basis. It then depends on how much you're able to support your position. I think for every item in the tax law, the taxpayer always has that first right to then accord the treatment and provide the documents to support whatever treatment that you've given to it. So it's not actually you're not actually leaving it to the FRS to decide on what treatment to accord it. You are going to treat it the way you deem fit, providing the necessary document to support your own position, and then take it to the FRS. At the end of the day, is always a question of who has the superior argument and who is able to back whatever treatment that you've given to it. So it is important that taxpayers are able to make sure that those documents are available. You're going to have instances, of course, you have instances where some of those transactions may not have the right document as FRS may want it. At that point, it all depends on how you're able then to present the issue to the FRS. I believe that the FRS, I mean, they are human anyway. Mr. Ahmed did say that, look, we're all Nigerians. This thing is also affecting FRS, it's affecting everybody. We're fully aware of what's going on. And I want to believe that what is being said at the headquarters of the FRS will also be transmitted down to the state offices and the field officers who are going to be looking at these transactions and coming up with the first report. So, I mean, to answer that question, essentially, you are going to have to treat the transaction yourself first and then present it to the FRS with the appropriate document that you have, which is why we're stressing the importance of making sure that during this period, you find a way of making your documents available. If it's to have them scanned, put it in a shared drive, leverage on technology to make sure that when those audits do happen, you are not found wanting and you're not asking questions as to how do I substantiate the treatment I've given to an item in my tax return.
So much for that, Chinwendu. I've just been informed now that that Mr. Abubakar Ahmed had to had to leave, although it was a bit abrupt. I would have loved to hear him have his final remarks. But there are questions here coming for him, and he has mentioned that we can email those questions to him, and then we still get responses to them. And those responses will be duly forwarded to the participants because we have your email addresses. So rest assured those questions would be addressed. But there's a question here specifically for you, Mr. Akande. It says, my question is for Mr. Akande. Is there timeline currently being worked upon to close all open audit cases? I know you mentioned in the course of your conversation the other time that reconciliations are going to commence fully, by the 1st of July. But this participant is asking that, are there timelines, in the wake of what we are currently experiencing, to say all open audit cases are going to be closed? Are there specific timelines that the agency had earmarked for the closure of such open audit cases?
Thank you again, so that I can just clarify this. Now, to close a reconciliation depends on two parties, and that much we are aware of. Once we have set for ourselves a program, which will also be clearly stated in our public notice, that the resolutions of the TAC meetings that we are going to have will be binding on all parties as long as they have been duly notified to attend the meeting. So I can't say there's a timeline for now, but essentially what we are going to do is that we're going to put in place a process that allows for speedy conclusion of all open audits. Once the meeting is held and all parties are expected to have front-loaded all the documentation requirements to support all the contending issues. And part of the decisions we are going to put in place is that for every objection item or issue, if it is not backed with requisite documentation, then that objection item is deemed to be moot and dischargeable. So we can assure you that we won't be having more than maximum 2 meetings for any open audit. That I can say. Now, to say that everything will end by September, December, I don't think it's something that I can just let you know now. It is just not feasible. But the truth of that is that for every slated reconciliation, we will most likely have just only 1 meeting, because the process we have put in place will be in the public notice. We make it easier for all parties to see that, because really, like I said before, if the documents are there and the numbers are there, we'll all be on the same page. Now we can now agree whether you have maybe underpaid, you have paid adequately, or overpaid. Now, the most important one that maybe will affect the taxpayers, that if he or she has underpaid, then the underpaid, knowing the circumstances which we have found ourselves now, it's a public health issue, which whether we don't like it or not, but it has now become an economic crisis, and we are all aware of where we find ourselves. It does not mean, because it's not in the interest of the state, that you comply in year 2019 and you now fold up your business. Rather, even if you have payments to be made, we can have a situation where you have staggered payment, instrumental arrangement. Once we have that one in place, okay, maybe I can just let you know now that there's something that I think we have said, that if for an instance now you have an outstanding liability with us, most likely, if you put in place a payment plan that ends by December 2020, there's every likelihood that interest and penalty components of it will be waived. I hope my chairman is not listening, saying that I'm letting this year back. But mostly, if because that's something, you see, we're just still operating within the ambits of the law. It's something that the law provides for
Absolutely.
At the agency level. So if we have so that's kind of arrangement we are going to have. So it's to make life easier for you to remain in business, so that you employ people, so that you take people off the streets, and that's essentially what we will focus on. So the person should be rest assured that once there's a meeting is slated for his or her company, and then we will not treat just a single year that is all for every entity. All open audits for that entity will be taken up at the same time, so that anything that is open will be cleared at once. So, but now it's now for them, for the taxpayer, to please. We will list out all the issues that are at stake. Then they should present all the information and documentary evidence they have to support it. Then we can mutually take a decision which will be binding on all parties. Thank you.
Fantastic approach there, Mr. Akande. Thank you so much for making that very clear. I'm still going to stay on you because in the course of this discussion, we have stressed the need for documentation. Chinwendu has said taxpayers should look at how they can preserve those documents. Mr. Ahmed has mentioned that documentation is key. You have also said that yourself. This question is saying, in the event that for whatever reason, I as a taxpayer, I am unable to make relevant audit documentation available due to the pandemic, will the LIRS give any concession in that regard? When we asked the FIRS the other time, FIRS mentioned that there will be concessions. So I guess this participant is saying, will LIRS also be very kind? Will there be concession with respect to the emphasis that is placed on documentation?
Now, let me on case-to-case basis, which whatever decision we're going to make will be something that is reasonable to a disinterested third party. How do I mean? So that anybody reviewing the file in the future, we know that we have done what is right. You don't have to, well, you check through the sequence of events and the documentation you have on file, that we have exhausted to reasonable level to get a validating third-party document, then something that we can live with. But don't forget also, because essentially everything that we do now is transactional based, and because most of, we deal with the individuals, and most people have transited to the digital platform. So it shouldn't be an issue really, as long as you are willing to approach whoever platform you have used to transact that business, to generate your the kind of information that we'll be asking you to provide us with. But be that as it may, if it is absolutely impossible for you to actually get the kind of, then I think it's a decision that we can take mutually at the meeting.
Okay, fantastic. I will take this one question and then I come to Chinwendu very quickly. Mr. Akande, this taxpayer is asking, why has the LIRS not updated taxpayer payee remittances details, despite the fact that annual returns, annual employee filings were done online? After logging in their individual tax platform, their remittance statements are still new. So this is talking about updates, of updates to the details of the gross earnings and taxes paid by employees, for previous years. That despite the fact that the filing was done online, that should make seamless updates possible, for the agency. Yeah. 6 months into the year, that has still not been done. This taxpayer is saying, why is that? Are there plans or are there things that are actually getting in the way?
Yeah, let me first apologize if that has not been done. You understand? If it has not been done, then we first apologize. But I know maybe they are doing them in batches, because we introduced the e-tax platform last year. So there's a transition from the Lagos State EBS platform, that's electronic banking system, which maybe the person is accessing. So what you will have that if that person has been registered on the e-tax platform, but the e-tax platform, we need you to key in a unique identifier, something like that. If you have done it, most likely you have the updated information on the e-tax platform. However, it's something I will inquire from the head of IT to know how far they have gone. But I know we are transiting from the EBS platform to the e-tax platform. The e-tax platform will give you a complete history of, but I'm not too sure every taxpayer in Lagos has been migrated to the e-tax platform. I know we have not done that, but it's something that we are doing, and hopefully we should conclude that in the next maybe 3 months maximum, God willing.
Okay, thank you so much. Chinwendu, let me come to you on this, and I stay on you for these 2 questions that I have coming in. I mean, this is underscoring the need for taxpayers and businesses to be able to strike some sort of balance at this time. Taxpayers are considering, I mean, given the fact that cash flow has now become a very important resource, for businesses. There are considerations that taxpayers should probably delay remittances and filing in order to reallocate those resources, to some more pressing business needs and exigencies. But the laws have actually also specified big sticks, on the neck of defaulting taxpayers that are not going to be making such payments as timely as the law has stipulated. So the question here is, how should taxpayers strike that balance? For instance, the penalty for VAT filing. The penalty for non-filing of VAT had been increased from what it was, I think 5,000 to 50,000 and 5,000 for every subsequent month, and now 25,000 for every. So the question is, the penalty for non-compliance has become a nightmare, and now cash is a constraint. How should how can they balance this tussle?
All right, thanks a lot, Dejo, for that question. It's something that I think I sort of addressed at some points. Obviously, for a business to even pay taxes, you've got to be able to make revenue. You've got to be able to make money. And we're in this COVID-19 pandemic era, and every business is also trying as much as possible to ensure that beyond COVID-19, they remain in business. And for you to do that, you've got to have funds to be able to keep the business going. Your business continuity plan has to be there. And what that implies that you're going to have to, you have companies that need funds to meet their immediate obligations. One, which is paying salaries, making payment for their loans, for the ones who were not able to get some form of moratorium on the ongoing loan repayments. And you also need funds, obviously, to make the required investment that will drive growth beyond COVID-19. So yes, you're going to have that issue, and coupled with the fact that you also need to meet your obligation, your tax obligation. So I think what companies need to do is then to try as much as possible to wait and look at the impact of not making the tax remittance versus the impact of not having the cash to make the required business investment and meet all the other obligations. It's going to be on a case-by-case basis. You've got to be able to evaluate your own position to say, okay, I've got this amount of money to pay as tax liability. If I make that payment, what is the impact of making that payment on my business? Obviously, the advice is not for taxpayers not to meet their tax obligations, but I mean, you've got to be real and say, okay, what is the impact of making this payment on my business? So at that point, it may be a good time for you to then reach out to the FIRS or the LIRS, as the case may be, to have a conversation with them to see what concession you can get. Obviously, it's not for you to then delay payments of a tax liability forever. It's just a timing thing. So you're going to be asking for some form of concession. So why don't you give me some time, to allow me to meet this obligation, knowing fully well that meeting that obligation at that immediate time may not be possible given the impact it may have on your business. So this is a time for companies to be very proactive, to review their own position, to see how their cash flow obligations will impact their business, and be able to tell at what point you need to engage the tax authorities for some form of concession. Like Mr. Akande did say, and I think Mr. Ahmed also said that the tax authorities are going to be there to support taxpayers. Yes, there may be instances where you may not get that kind of support, but I mean, we can only remain optimistic given what we've heard today to say, look, we are all affected in this thing. The company who is making tax payment today, you also want that company to be alive tomorrow to continue to make tax payment. Remember, if those companies are not able to survive beyond 2020, what it means is that the tax revenue that the authorities will collect in 2021 will dwindle. It will go down because the revenues made this year will be reported in tax return next year for companies. So obviously it is in the best interest of everybody to have a conversation on the table and agree on how to provide whatever relevant support you can give to companies to ensure that they continue to remain in business. I mean, you have that issue of having to balance both obligations. You have your obligations as a business, and then you also have your obligation to the tax authority, which is to make sure you settle your tax liability. So, like I said, for every company, you've got to be able to sit down and evaluate your own position, because it's going to be different from one company to the other. There will be companies who may be able to make some form of payment. There may be some companies who may not be able to pay at all. So if it's to reach some payment schedule with the tax authority to say, okay, why don't you let me make payments on a month by month basis or every quarter, or whatever arrangements you're able to reach with the authorities, that may work. So it's the time for companies to be very proactive in evaluating that your situation. You don't have to wait till when the FIRS or the LIRS sends you a bill to settle. You've got to do your own internal checks. This is the time for companies to then do like a health check to say, okay, where am I? If the tax authorities were to come today, what would be the position? What manner of exposures am I being faced? So it's a time for you to also begin to speak to your tax consultants to provide that kind of support to make sure that there are no surprises. So if there are liabilities that are there that you may not even be aware of, this is a time for you to find out and then reach out to the tax authorities. Of course, we have clients who have done similar things to say, okay, look, I've done some form of health check, and I think there may be some exposure here and there. Now, do I approach the FIRS knowing fully well that I don't have the cash right now to meet that obligation? So it's something that companies will have to evaluate their position to say, okay, where do I stand? From perspective of a tax obligation. What do I owe to the FIRS, or what do I potentially owe to the LIRS? And do I have the resources to meet those obligations? And if I don't, and given the fact that I have to meet those obligations by law, then I have to engage the relevant tax authorities to say, okay, this is what I'm faced with. How do I then resolve that issue?
Absolutely. I couldn't agree less with you. And I'm sure Mr. Akande has, over the period, I'm aware personally that he's been very pivotal towards having those kind of conversations with the taxpayers, such that a win-win arrangement is then made, to be able to ensure the agency achieves its objectives and the taxpayer also goes around what the challenges are. But very, very directly, Mr. Akande, this question is asking you that what documents would taxpayer be required to provide to substantiate salary reductions and layoffs? So during this period, I've reduced salaries by 50%. Some banks have already done that. Some companies have done that. So improving in justifying that this is what they've done. This participant is asking, what documents would you require to be able to have taxpayer make such substantiating position?
Yeah, quickly, there are two. I would say there are just two. The first one is I believe there will be internal notification by the employer to its employee. If you're going to ask me to go off, you have to notify me. If you're going to reduce my salary, you have to notify me. That's number one. Number two is because we know that most employers these days don't pay by cash anyway, because everybody has migrated. So the document from a third party, which is the bank, showing that, well, in January, I've asked to credit so number of people with their salary and what have you. And in February, I've said the same thing. In March, and then in April, when the thing kicked in, I said, no, instead of paying 20 people, pay 10 and pay them X instead of Y that we've paying them before. And it will be there on the statement. So we are all looking at the same documentation. You guys know. And once we have assurance that, yes, this is what has happened and what have you, then I don't think we will have issues in actually putting forward our position that, well, this is what transpired between January to December of the preceding year. Because the records will be there. As long as we are willing to disclose all of this, then we shouldn't have. I've told you, the challenge we have is availability of these documents if they are credible. But we know that most of them are available. Then do we have access to it? Because if you don't bring it forward, then we don't have access to it. But if you have access to it, we are looking at the same documents. Most likely, give or take, we will arrive at the same conclusion, plus or minus 5%, and anybody can live with that. We should be able to live with it. So that's just it's just the fact that the employer, in this case, must be able to put his or her records on the table. Yeah. Once we have that, then I think we shouldn't have too much problem in ascertaining.
Thank you so much, Mr. Akande. Thank you so much, Chinwendu. I've been prompted that time is fast spent, but I would give us the opportunity to have our remarks. There's this question here that we want Mr. Akande to quickly take. I know you've talked about the fact that there's going to be concession. This participant is asking. The questions keep coming in. But like we've said, the ones we can't take now, Mr. Akande, we can also still send them to you so that we get your responses to them. But this question is a bit direct to say, is LIRS considering extending the timeline for pay remittance from 10th day of the month following the month of deduction? Is it in consideration at all to have that extension?
Now, this is an area which we try as much as possible. The challenge we've always had is this: if you are not going to be able to do it, nothing stops you from writing to us that, please, my deduction for the month of May will be remitted maybe sometimes on or before 5th of July. And I can tell you this, that I may not disclose the name of it, a top blue chip company wrote to us way back in March and told us they're not going to pay until May, and they've paid. But we need to have this conversation. There must be a trust between the taxpayer and the tax authority. If you give us notice that because of these challenges, please, the tax due on the 10th, I may not be able to do it, but give me till the following month. I think it's something that I can assure we have done it. So because I'm telling you of something of a big corporate entity that we did for way back it was before even the lockdown, the lockdown. So it's something that we can do, but we must have that. You must let us know in advance. You must let us know in advance.
Constant engagement,
communication. Yes, that's what is important. Yes, that's what's
thank you so much, sir. Chinwendu also mentioned proactivity and the need for taxpayers to constantly ensure they engage their consultant at this time. The times are completely unprecedented, and they require different strategies. We currently have over 100 participants, in this webinar, and I also enjoin us to look forward to our next webinar session on common reporting standards regulation, which announcement is also going to be pushed out there. In order to also ensure that this constant engagement is done in the appropriate way, that is constant engagement of tax audits, of taxpayers with the tax authorities, we equally have a training session, in Andersen Tax on the 24th of June, and the topic is designing an effective tax strategy for mitigating tax risk in a remote working world, condition, meaning the world has changed. What do we need to do? How should you design effective tax strategy that mitigates the risk that are pertinent at this time? So, Chinwendu, I would ask you this question as final remarks to say, generally speaking, as we round up, how can the tax audit process in Nigeria be improved? You've seen what it is like from the point of view of the FRS. You've seen all of the good ideas you've also heard all of the good ideas that Mr. Akande had exposed us to during this webinar. How do you think the session the tax audit process can be improved upon?
Okay, thanks, Dejo. Just to round up, I think for the tax audit session process, rather, of course, it involves two parties. You have the revenue authorities and just you have the taxpayer. So essentially, once you have a process that has been put in place, and I believe the FRS or the LIRS, as the case may be, do have some form of document that sort of drives how the audit process should be conducted. So if everybody plays their part, essentially you have that process run seamlessly, and you can achieve the objective in a shorter period. There are instances where the taxpayer has sort of submitted some documents and it's taking forever for the relevant tax authority to respond. Of course, you also have instances where some taxpayers, maybe due to no fault of theirs, or maybe due to the fact that they may not have the required team to handle that process, sort of experience some form of delay in also responding to some request from the FRS or the LRS. So I think what needs to happen is that both parties need to, as much as possible, play their part in ensuring that that process goes smoothly. Because you are dealing with documentation, you are dealing with responses from both parties. So if everybody is very proactive and everybody is responsive, I believe the process will be handled a lot better. So we have these issues, but it's a call for everybody to wake up.
Absolutely.
We're also pleading as tax consultants and also as taxpayers, we're also pleading that the relevant tax authorities also in making some demands, that some demand that you see, and you're wondering, how am I going to be able to provide this given the current situation? So I think this is the time for tax authorities to also be as realistic as possible to ensure that the audit process doesn't go beyond what it should.
Mutual understanding is what I've heard there. Mutual understanding. Mr. Akande, what will be your final remarks to the participants? Your final remarks as we round up.
Thank you for this opportunity. I must say a big thank you to Andersen Tax for providing us. So the truth of the matter is this, as we have all heard, tax audit is just a compliance tool. It is not a witch hunting tool. We must all agree to that. And then for every human intervention, we don't have a perfect system. So there's always room for improvement. And I can assure you at the LRS level that we are there to assist you to ensure that we all, because we all have everything at stake here. It's our country, and it's our state, and it's our city. So we all have a duty to ensure that things run smoothly. And if part of it is for us to pay our tax as at when due, so be it. And then, like I say, if for any reason there are things that are not too clear, please feel free to contact us, and we will always be there to provide explanation. And we also find a way to, we will hold ourselves, the two of us together, both the taxpayer and the tax authority, so that we can all cross the bridge. I believe it's a process which we have started on, and we should continue to do it that way, because we all have this at stake and we must get it done in the proper way. We wish you the very best, and appeal to everybody to keep safe and keep being prosperous. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Akande. Thank you to the panelists. Thank you to the participants. It has indeed been a very fruitful deliberation, and we urge you to look forward to the communication on the next webinar session. Thank you so much. That will mark the end of the webinar session for today. Thanks a lot. We do appreciate you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.